Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to learn about vision. I'm Joye Newman, and along with my dear friend Carol Kranowitz, we are the InSync Child. I'm pretty sure Carol's in the audience tonight because vision is my baby. And I'm thrilled that you want to learn about it because I think it's highly underrated. I think it's not well understood. And most importantly, it's not infrequent that neurodivergent behaviors that are diagnosed incorrectly are really based on a visual issue. So by the end of this presentation, you should understand what you're looking at and hopefully work to get and keep your child's vision in sync. Okay, I'm not sure why we're not moving here. Okay, so this is what I was talking about with the misdiagnoses. Right now, 1 in 36 US children is reported to have autism. That probably, if you've been following that, you know that that's sort of increasing almost yearly, it seems to me. And I don't know why that is, but I believe that some of these children with an autism diagnosis may in fact have a visual problem. 1 in 9 children are now considered to have ADHD. That's a new statistic. It's scary to me, but again, ADHD behavior that looks like it's ADHD can actually be based on a visual issue. Estimates of how many children have sensory processing disorder range from 5 to 16.5%, but the prevalence can be higher in certain populations. There's some research that says that up to 40% of children with ADHD also have SPD, and children that are born by C-section, there's an 80% chance of SPD as opposed to a 12% chance in the control group. So let's take a look at what all of these diagnoses are. This is a chart. The top reads vision problems, and you can see if you look down the column that every single one of these behaviors can be explained by a visual problem. Allergies can look like, vision problems can look like allergies. ADHD, autism, dyslexia, sensory processing disorder, and social anxiety. All of those can be explained by a visual problem. The brain is an amazing, amazing organ, and it wants us to understand what we see. But the brain needs a hook or something it's familiar with in order to make sense of what we're seeing. So I'd like to take this opportunity to give you a small example of what I'm talking about. I'm going to give you a minute to read this screen. And now I'll read it to you. This message serves to prove how our minds can do amazing things, impressive things. In the beginning, it was hard, but your mind is reading it automatically without even thinking about it. Be proud. Only certain people can read this. You can forget the part about please forward this if you can read it. I wish I could see you to know how many people were able to read it. What's happened here is that your visual system brought in some information to your brain, and your brain used the things it knows, that hook we were talking about, which are words that your brain is familiar with. and helped you to make sense of it. Now, that's hard to do. It was probably fun to do it this way, but imagine a child that has to go through life doing it like this. It's a lot of work, and it's really tiring. Okay, here's another one. Look at the stairs. They will either look like they're going down or up, and it doesn't matter which one. But keep staring at the steps. And in about 10 seconds, the directions will switch. And if you keep looking, it'll go back the other way. So what's going on here? Your brain sees it either going up or going down, and it's waiting to find the hook in there. So your brain is waiting to see what comes next. Are you walking up the steps, and then where does it go? Or are you going down the steps, and then where does it go? But since it's not going anywhere, your brain thinks it's wrong. It's giving you the wrong information, so it switches to the other way. Now, I have to be clear, I am not a neuroscientist, and I can't prove that that explanation is true, but I can't think of any other explanation, knowing what I know about vision and the brain. Here's another one. Look at this picture. And I imagine what most of you think you see is the back of a naked man or woman with really curly hair looking out at the water. Now, because our eyes usually go to the middle of an image, most of us looked at that black, round, fuzzy thing, right? But if you move your eyes downward a little, you'll see that what this photo is an outreached hand holding a sea anemone. Do you see it? So what your brain did is it looked at that black round thing and thought, okay, that's probably a person. And that's what it told your mind, I guess. Think about what happens to a child that, because he doesn't have great control over his visual system, has to work so hard to make sense of the world. I'm assuming all of you see that sea urchin now, and we're going to go on to one more. Now, I imagine what you think you see is a woman with her butt exposed. Once again, our eyes looked at the center of the photo, and we've kind of focused on that t-shirt. And then our brain made sense. There's a woman, and there's probably her exposed butt. Except if you look at the bottom, you'll see that the things that you thought were her exposed butt cheeks are actually the back of two bald heads. I'm assuming you can see them. If you don't, if you have trouble looking at them, look at the bottom half of the picture. You see the man with the glasses over on the left? Okay, so why am I showing you these? We're all adults with years and years of visual processing stored in our brains. And even with all of that visual memory, we still make visual errors. Now think how hard it is for a young child with a struggling visual system. Think how hard he has to work to make sense of the world. So, what do we do? One of the most important things we need to understand is that vision and acuity are not the same things. Unfortunately, many people believe acuity is all there is to vision. Couldn't be further from the truth. Acuity is the measurement of sight. Probably most of you are familiar with the chart that you're looking at. It's called a Snellen chart, and it measures vision. It measures acuity based on the ratio of 20/20, which is considered perfect eyesight. A baby comes into the world with a visual acuity of 2200. That means he can see 10% as well as a person with perfect acuity. An infant can only see clearly about the distance of his hand from his eyes. And as he matures, his acuity should naturally stabilize at 20/20. It used to be that happened at about 6 or 7 years of age. But with the use of screens, I imagine that in a few years, that number is going to change. Scandinavian countries typically don't start teaching reading or even letters until 6 or 7. And that's because that's when children become 20/20. Children were born they're born farsighted, and the best thing they can do for their vision is be outside and look at distances. The interpretation of what is seen through acuity is what vision is. It is the interpretation of what one sees. A study released in 2021 projects that over 50%, half of the global population, will develop myopia by the year 2050. Myopia is what we know as nearsightedness. Let's think about why that is. How many of us, if not ourselves, how many of us have seen children holding their screens maybe less than 12 inches, maybe 6, 7, 8 inches from their faces, well before they're 7 years old, right? So what's so bad about being myopic? You can always get glasses, right, to fix it. People with myopia may have trouble seeing objects that are far away and may need to squint to see clearly. That's a problem, especially if you're driving or in a crowd. They may also experience blurry vision. They can also, if they see clearly at night, even if they see clearly during the day, they could still have a lot of trouble in dim light or at night. Myopia can cause eye strain, which can make the eyes feel tired or sore. And many people with myopia, especially when it's not diagnosed, have headaches. So let's take a look at, well, before we go to this, let me just say this. In children, myopia can also lead to, well, poor performance in school, certainly, shortened attention span. There's a possible ADHD diagnosis, holding objects close to their face. They may have trouble with eye contact. There's a possible autism diagnosis. And as they get older, they can be at higher risk for other eye conditions like retinal detachment, cataracts, glaucoma, and macular degeneration. These conditions can have a very high cost to the young child, but also to the teenager and the adult. This is my favorite illustration to show you about vision and acuity. Look at the picture. If you have seen this picture and you know about it, then your brain already has the hook and knows what to do with what you are seeing through your acuity. You probably, if you haven't seen it, you probably are looking at shades of black and gray and white in a nonsensical pattern. I'll let you look at it for a while. This is something probably everyone in the audience is familiar with. Okay, your brain doesn't know what to do with this confusing picture because you've never seen it like this. You can't associate it with anything or compare it with anything else because you don't have that visual hook. But assuming you have adequate eyesight, you can see it. Your acuity is okay, but you can't interpret it. And that's what vision is all about. So I'm going to tell you what this is now. This is a cow looking at you. There's the outline of her face. You see her ears and her nose. I'm going to show you the first one for a minute. I wish I could hear your ahas. So, visual processing or vision allows you to process and make sense of what you're seeing. Efficient visual processing requires many skills. To make sense of the whole picture, your brain uses acuity, tracking, binocularity, and other visual skills that we won't have time to get into tonight. A growing child requires months and years of visual experiences to develop these skills. He is not going to develop proper visual skills sitting still in front of a screen. He has to move himself through the 3D world. These skills do not and cannot and will not develop smoothly if their eyes are glued to electronic screens for hours each day. They have to move through space. So let's talk about how vision develops. A child is born with a pair of eyes, but not with a visual world. He must build that world himself, and it is his private creation. So that was Arnold Gesell said that, and many of you are probably familiar with that name from the Gesell Institute of Child Development at Yale. So his theory is known as maturational developmental theory. And he is the one that discovered or shared with us that all children go through the same sequence of development, but not at the same time. And those of us who work with children, the movement of children, occupational therapists, physical therapists, we know that by watching children go from creeping on their hands and knees to standing up, to walking, to running. But it's the same, and it's the same with vision. They start in the exact same way. Given the same environment, they would develop in the same way, but unfortunately, many kids are not given the appropriate environments to develop good visual skills. But a child who spends the majority of his first 6 years in front of a screen, we call that working at near, will have great difficulty making sense of a classroom world that's filled with moving children and spatial constraints and challenges. I have to wonder if some of those kids aren't the ones with these diagnoses that probably wouldn't have happened had the kids not been in front of screens for all that time. So we're still talking about how vision develops. At birth, babies don't see clearly beyond their grasp. They have 20/200 vision. They can see large shapes and faces, bright colors, and objects that are about 8 to 10 inches away from their face. They don't yet have the ability to look at things. They just look at whatever comes into their visual field. And they certainly don't have any hooks yet to interpret that information. If you brush a newborn's hand, she'll grasp your finger. And eventually, because she's holding it through her tactile sense, she'll start to look at it. At this stage, at the very early stage, the tactile sense is training the visual system. By 6 months, she's able to manipulate a toy. Excuse me for 1 minute. She's able to manipulate a toy using her hands to turn it and her visual system to examine it. Yet she's still feeling it, right? She's feeling it and looking at it. And there she's building that hook. The eyes and brain are working together so that by 1 year, she can just look at the toy and recognize it without having to touch it. So that hook is there. Vestibular system and visual. These are really, really closely intertwined. The vestibular system and the visual system coordinate with each other through brain pathways in order to control visual fixation, which means holding your eyes still. The ear-to-eye connection is known as the vestibulo-ocular reflex, VOR. The VOR has a critical role in keeping the head still during head rotation. This is known as gaze stability, and it helps with visual fixation, which we will talk about in a minute. The VOR also sends a signal down to the postural muscles of the trunk, arms, and legs, which is crucial for maintaining balance. A faulty VOR can cause dizziness and confusion. Like if you're ever at a stoplight and your car is not moving and the car next to you is moving and you're not really sure whether you're moving or the car next to you is moving. That's the VOR we're talking about. So imagine a child who feels that way in the classroom every time someone starts to move. How confusing and how uncomfortable that must be. The visual and vestibular systems work together to keep our bodies upright and perfectly balanced. If you're able to stand up where you are, please do, and focus on a target that's directly in front of you at eye height. Keep looking at that target and raise one foot so that you're balancing on just one foot. When you feel balanced, close your eyes. And I suspect that many of you will become a bit shaky. We use our vision to keep us balanced, to give us information about where we are in the world. From the time we learn to walk, balancing our bodies becomes second nature, something we do automatically without even thinking about it. We hope that's the case. But if children need to really look at things in order to stay balanced, they're working harder and harder than they need to. When we can balance, when our vestibular system is working and our eyes are working, that gives us freedom to scan a room or to fixate on something. Both skills are needed for academic success, but also success out in the world. When the visual system is functioning properly, the need for action can be replaced by observation. So the young child needs to move through space in order to learn, in order to set up those hooks so that his visual system can automatically make sense of the information coming in through his eyes. If he doesn't have those hooks readily available, he has to work much, much harder. A 1-year-old needs to explore a room by moving around. But when his visual system develops, he can explore the room visually and make sense because those hooks are there. Our vestibular system develops before our visual system, causing our movements to guide our vision, the first few years of life. Frequently, we see kids running without looking at where they're going. They're just going. And that's what we mean by their movement is guiding their vision. we're hoping to teach children and adults as well that vision can guide their movements, that you need to move to be able to do that. Many of us, me included, walk through the world looking down about 6 feet in front of us. We walk in a very limited visual space. We kind of take this 9 square feet of space and walk in it. So the next time you take a walk, pay attention to where your eyes go. Rather than looking out and down, look at something far ahead of you. And as you walk and keep looking at that, see if you can expand your peripheral vision to take in more of the world. And each day, try to expand that even further. When your necessary skills, visual skills are developed, vision will guide the movement. Okay, we're going to take a brain break. Here's another one of those things. I imagine that what you see is a man and a woman, and there's that exposed butt again. Now look, move your eyes to the left of the photograph, and you'll see a woman with long dark hair. If you follow her hair down with your eyes, you'll see her shoulder and her arm. That's what's going on. The visual system went for the hook, and we tricked it. Our visual systems are so complex, and sometimes our vision can really play games. It can be so confusing for a child that doesn't have a good visual system. So the visual system that we're going to talk about right now, it's made up of acuity, binocularity, fixation, and tracking. Early visual skills emerge from the strong tactile, vestibular, and proprioceptive sensory systems, and they continue to develop simultaneously with other sensory and perceptual motor skills, as long as the child is moving. So we're going to focus on these 4 areas. So we talked about acuity. Why do we need acuity? We need acuity for recognizing letters and numbers. We need it for recognizing a friend's face. We certainly need it for reading. We need it for discriminating the corn from the lima beans and the succotash. How do we develop and enhance acuity, especially in these young children? Pay attention to near and far distances. Playing I Spy in a car is great, and the further out you have them look, the better. Offer opportunities for small motor play. Add a visual component to most motor activities. Children who play most of their games on screens aren't even aware that there is a 3-dimensional world to move through. So the more vision you add, the more visual components you add to the motor activities, the more they'll start to pay attention. So when someone's walking across a balance beam, stand at the end of it and hold up a shape and say, what shape is this? What color is this? Let them use their eyes as they're moving so that they don't have to do one or the other. They can learn to do both. Ask questions about pictures and books. Now that is near, so you need acuity for near and far, but the more visual targets, the more visual questions you can ask a child, the better. Okay, this is a big one, binocularity. Binocularity is the ability to use both eyes together. What we see is the result of signals sent from each of the eyes to the brain. Usually the brain receives the signals at the same time. The information contained from each eye is slightly different, and with a well-functioning binocular vision, the brain is able to put these differences together to judge distances and coordinate eye movements. When you see a child resting her head on her arm or on the floor or on the desk, that child is only using one eye. Because here's what's happening. If the information was coming in through both eyes in that posture, the brain would see double vision. And because we talked about how smart the brain is and how it wants to help you, the brain will automatically turn off the image from the lower eye. So that child is only using one eye. If that continues for a long amount of time, the brain just says, forget it. I'm not even going to use this eye anymore. And that is called amblyopia. But I encourage you to, whenever you see a child, or an adult for that matter, with his or her head down on an ear, please ask them to sit up and please know that they are using only one eye. Why do we need binocularity? We need it for depth perception. You know, most of you, I assume, are sitting in front of a computer screen. So I invite you to cover one of your eyes, either one, and slowly reach out with your other hand to touch the screen. My guess is that it will be a little further away from you than you thought, or a little closer. That's depth perception. And the only way you can develop depth perception is to move through space. We need binocularity for playing hopscotch. We need it for stepping onto an escalator. We need it for judging distances. We need it for catching a ball. That's binocularity is crucial to success. What can we do to develop binocularity? Offer both hands to the young child rather than one. You want to keep that child balanced. You want to keep that child bilaterally integrated. Discourage children from laying heads on desks. I got ahead of myself, I apologize. Provide lots of bilateral activity. Have them jump as loud as they can on both feet while they're looking at your pictures that you're holding up. What is this a picture of? Is this a doggy or a giraffe? Is this red or blue? Have them use their eyes and move at the same time as much as you possibly can. Now we're going to talk about visual fixation. Visual fixation is focused on one task for a period, one target for a period of time, maintaining visual contact with the target. If you have a child who has poor visual fixation, he will not be able to make eye contact, right? He will not be able to probably to read. He will not be able to take in consistent visual information. He will have trouble completing art projects. He will have trouble reading, and he may look autistic, even though he's not. In reading, even though you need good tracking for reading, your eyes seem to move from left to right, assuming we're reading English. We want them to move in a smooth pattern, but what actually happens is that the eyes stop for a microsecond as they move. And that is fixation, even though it's just for a microsecond. Sorry. That is fixation, even though it's just a tiny amount of time, but the brain is taking in information during that fixation and puts it together to make sense of reading. What can we do to develop and enhance fixation? Threading cereal on a string, stacking blocks, playing with puzzles, visual tracking. Visual tracking is the ability to watch a moving target with the eyes as it moves horizontally, vertically, and in a circle without any head movement. We need visual tracking for crossing the street. You need to be able to watch those cars coming in both directions and predict when they're going to hit you. Catching a ball. Playing sports, especially ones that require hitting a ball. We need visual tracking for reading. Children who have trouble with visual tracking often reverse letters, reverse words, lose their place. They're not dyslexic, even though they might look that way. If you can fix the visual tracking issue, if you can work on that, you can improve their ability to read. What can you do to develop and enhance visual tracking? Play with feathers, balloons, bubbles, anything that moves slowly. Because just like with gross motor skills, moving your eyes slowly is harder than moving them quickly. Playing with flashlights. Our book, Growing an In-Sync Child, and our In-Sync Child activity cards have a bunch of great activities with flashlights that work on tracking. It's easiest to track, by the way, when you're laying down. So if you're working on tracking with kids, ask them to lay on their backs on the floor. That way they don't have to work, their vestibular system doesn't have to work on keeping them upright. All they need to do is work on strengthening those eyes. Playing with slowly rolling balls. Stringing beads in a sequence. There's another thing you can do right now to work on tracking. We can see how easy it is for you to track. Look at the seam of where the wall meets the ceiling. And start at the left corner and slowly move your eyes all the way across that seam to the next corner. And then go back the other way. Try not to move your head. Okay, let's have another brain break before we go on to signs of visual dysfunction. You're going to see this man either looking straight at you, or you're going to see the left side of his face in profile. If you see the left side of his face, looking right at you, then your vision is shifting slightly right. And look at the difference between what your eyes see simply by a minute little shift of your eyes. So look at the midline, and it's probably going to, once again, like the steps, shift. And that's because your eyes can't stay still that long. They're shifting. You're going to see his profile, and then you're going to see him straight on. So that slight shift of eyes gives us different information. Imagine what's happening to that child who doesn't have good control over where his eyes go. He gets different information based on where he's looking, and because he hasn't built up his visual system and all those hooks, he sometimes gets faulty information. and doesn't really know what to do with it. So here are some symptoms of visual dysfunction. These are some symptoms in appearance. You see an eyes can be frequently tearing. Okay, maybe the child has allergies. Red eyes or lids. Again, you see that, and the first thing most people probably think is allergies. Crust on eyelids, excessive blinking, one eye turning in or out, that's called strabismus. And sometimes children only have that appearance when they're tired. But if you see a child with an eye turning in or out, that child, by definition, cannot have depth perception. Excessive squinting. And some of you might recognize these appearances in yourselves. A head tilt. If you tilt your head, you cannot have depth perception because the information that your eyes are taking in are on different levels. Closing of one eye. Obviously, you don't have depth perception then because you're not using both eyes. Here are some symptoms of visual dysfunction that could look like ADD. Difficulty completing tasks. Is that attention deficit disorder or is it a visual problem? Tendency to fatigue. Tendency to daydream. That sounds like ADHD to me, but it can also be a visual problem. Here's a visual symptoms of tracking issues. Moving your head when you're looking at books. Difficulty watching a ball. Losing place while reading, that's a big one. Skipping words and lines. Reversing letters and words. Now, those, children probably before the age of 6 or children who are learning to read and write almost always reverse letters and words to begin with. But we're talking about older kids now. If it's a constant issue that doesn't get better, it could be a tracking issue. Here's some symptoms of visual dysfunction for binocularity. Misjudging where things are in space. That could be misjudging where the cup is on your table or where something is far away. Closing or squinting one eye is a definite indicator of poor binocularity. Difficulty sustaining visual attention. Difficulty maintaining eye contact and discomfort in crowded places. Sometimes we see children who just do not want to be in a group. And it might be diagnosed as social anxiety, but it could really be that their visual system is just absolutely overwhelmed by the information that they're getting. Here's symptoms of visual dysfunction that children might tell you. They might say that their eyes hurt after concentrated visual attention. You might see them rubbing their eyes, or they might actually be able to tell you that they have headaches. They say that their eyes are burning, their eyes are itching. Report of double vision. Some kids, the younger children probably don't even know to say that. But if you have an older child that says it, or if you suspect it, maybe you can even ask. Moving objects or words that tend to move when a child's reading and says, oh, that word just jumped. Sounds a little crazy, but I've had several kids report that kind of stuff. So if you see any of these issues, I strongly suggest that you take the child for an examination by a developmental or behavioral optometrist. The optometric extension program, the website is right here on your screen, can help you find someone. I'm pretty sure they do it around the world, but certainly in the United States, they can help. And the difference, there's a big difference between a developmental or behavioral optometrist and an ophthalmologist. An ophthalmologist is a medical physician who is trained to treat pathology of the eye. Developmental or behavioral optometrist is someone who's gone to 3 years of optometric school after a bachelor's degree, and then spent an additional 1 or 2 years learning about vision, not just acuity, vision. And as with any intervention, there will be people where this is not an appropriate intervention. But I recommend that everybody take their children before they start school, or if they're spending a lot of time on screens, or if they have any of the issues we talked about, please suggest that they be examined by a developmental or behavioral optometrist, because the earlier we find the visual issues, the sooner we can fix them. And these things are by and large fixable. And we're saving children we're saving the parents lots of money. We're saving the children lots of time and heartache by fixing these things. In closing, here are some helpful tips to help the child build a creation of the world. And I think we are all guilty of this. When handing something to a child or an adult, or when taking something from her, always be sure that she looks at your hand. We tend to just hand something to someone and that person takes it, right? We don't even look at where we're putting it. So when you hand her a toy, move the toy until she looks at what she's taking. Because most of us expect the person that's giving it to us will just put it in our hand. So we don't need to look. When she gives you something, don't just take it from her. Move your hand here and there to make her look at the toy's destination. We're training ourselves to use our eyes to look because we just don't use our eyes enough. We do this as adults, we do this with our kids, we do this with each other, and it's such a simple little thing that can really start training the child to recognize that her eyes can give her information that's important. If there are any teachers out there, here are some classroom tips. Please only place letters on bulletin boards horizontally. It might look cute to put them diagonally or vertically or in a circle, but we're helping children learn to use their eyes. That's a tracking issue. We want them to learn to track from left to right. We want them to see things the way it's supposed to be until they're a little older and can make sense of things that aren't exactly the way they should be. Beware of visual clutter. Some teachers think it's a lot of fun to put lots and lots of happy, fun, smiling, bright things up on the board. But these children are just learning to use their visual systems. Keep it simple. Keep it really, really simple. Use visual targets as often as possible, especially when kids are moving through. If there's any OTs out there in your treatment rooms, put up things that can be targets. We're trying to integrate the vision with the movement. And right now, kids aren't doing that, especially when they're sitting still and just moving their fingers. Hold on just a second here. There's one more, encourage children to move, certainly, but there's two other things that I didn't put on a slide, and I apologize for that. One is if you have young children, and I know this is a hassle, but it can be important. If you have young children, I recommend that you change the placement of their car seats every 2 or 3 weeks, unless the car seat's in the middle of the seat, of the back seat. That's okay. But if you have the child that sits on either side of the back seat, that child is only looking one way when she travels. So she's only looking out the window and she doesn't look the other way. And we want these kids to be balanced. So if you could switch that, and by the same token, if they're in a bedroom, especially if their bed is up against a wall, and if your child will tolerate it, some children do not like change. And if they don't like the change, don't do it. But if they can tolerate it, switch where their pillow is so that they're looking. So put their pillow where their feet are the next time you make their bed so that they're looking out a different way. If a child's bed is against the wall, he can only look one way. He can only have depth perception looking away from the wall. But if you switch where his pillow is, then either time he looks into the room, it's different. And we want to give them as much opportunity to explore visually as we can. Okay, I'm going to give you one more chance to look at this. Whoops, I think I missed something here. Okay, I'll come back to it. Okay, so what can we do for kids? Limit screens. There's so much information about how screens mess up children, but here's what I believe about screens. Working on screens is taking time away from moving through the three-dimensional world, and that is the only way children can develop good visual skills. They have to move through space to do it. Go outside. Outside is the only place that you have almost unlimited visual opportunities. Also, there's a new study, I think out of Taiwan, that says that I think 2 hours of sunlight helps with I haven't read the whole study, but there's something about being outside and sunlight that helps with the visual system. Third one is be in a three-dimensional world. Please remember that so far we all live in a three-dimensional world, and these little children are spending a great deal of time in a two-dimensional world. And almost anything that they can learn or can experience or can appreciate or can laugh at on a screen can be translated into something in 3 dimensions. So Carol likes to tell a story about a mother who was thrilled about an app she found for her 4-year-old, where the 4-year-old used her finger to move oranges from one bowl to another. So what is a child learning? She's learning maybe to cross the midline, depending on where she's holding the screen, but she's learning nothing about what that orange feels like, or depth perception, or visual tracking, or any of the stuff we talked about. Might as well just give her oranges and some bowls and put her on the floor and let her do it with her real hands. So if you're if you can get anything from this, the most important thing to remember about how to help children develop, let them move through a three-dimensional world. So here's our friend again. Now that you've seen it, I imagine most of you got it immediately. And if you didn't, we can go back to that place where you can find an optometrist and you can have your own vision checked. And it is never, by the way, you are never too old to have your vision screened and to have your vision evaluated and to have your vision improved. Never too old. It's easiest to do it when you're young. It's easiest to give the children the opportunities to not need any intervention. But if some of this information has piqued your interest in some of the experiences that you yourself have had, I encourage you to be checked by a developmental or behavioral optometrist. You'll be amazed at what you can learn about yourself. So these are the In-Sync Child publications so far. Our book, Growing an In-Sync Child, has 60 activities, and many of them are vision focused. Vision is a big part of all of the activities that are in all three of these publications, which are all available at Therapro. Please keep in touch. Our website is insyncchild.com. On Facebook, my page is called the In-Sync Village. I post lots of stories and information and posters and articles about ways to keep children in sync. And what I find disturbing and disappointing is that many of the articles that I post about vision are not well read. And there's not a lot of comments and not a lot of feedback. And I don't know why that is. So join us on Facebook on the In-Sync Child and stay in sync. Take a few minutes each day to give your children moving experiences to last a lifetime. Okay, Allison, ready for questions? Whoops.
Very good. Okay, so before we leave your screen, Joy, we have a person asking if we can go back to the urchin picture again.
Say that again?
We have somebody asking if you can go back to that sea urchin picture again.
Sure. It'll take a minute or two, but sure. Uh-oh. Hold on. There we go.
Perfect. All right, so there's the sea urchin pigeon. All right, so questions coming in. Do you know if these presentation, do you know if the presentation of visual dysfunction presents themselves in older individuals or adults differently than in children, especially among individuals who have intellectual disability? If so, what are some of the differences?
Okay, so what are the differences between how
older adults and children present with visual difficulties?
Well, some of the symptoms would be the same, depending on what the visual problem is. So if you have somebody with an eye tilt, that person probably has inefficient binocularity. If you have someone who has trouble reading, that person probably has a tracking issue. If you have somebody that doesn't like to move through in crowds or doesn't like being on escalators or anything that's moving, that person could have a visual problem. I wonder if somebody's thinking of a specific population, maybe? I mean,
so I think she's asking the first part of that question, is there a difference between adults and children? And then the second part would be, if so, what are some of the differences? But I think she's looking at especially the intellectual disabilities.
Boy, that's so hard to say. I think the answer is that it's easier to train children who are just developing than it is someone who has been dependent on the visual system that they have, even if it's compromised. So we think about the brain and how the brain tries to help as much as it can. And so if there's somebody with intellectual disabilities or who has who has built all of his visual information on faulty information, then yeah.
Okay, perfect.
You know, that if that person, here's the problem with older people, especially people with intellectual disabilities, they learn to adapt to what their visual system tells them. And sometimes it's hard to tell whether that person is adapting to what they have or they have that problem because they're adapting. So sometimes you need to go backwards. You can look at a behavior and think, well, that person's behaving that way because they have, for instance, poor tracking. But if you worked on the tracking, they might not have that behavior anymore. Does that answer the question?
Well, Adele, if you want to respond with any other follow-ups, but I think that does cover a lot of it. The next question coming in is, I find a lot of developmental optometrists aren't covered by insurance. Why do you think this is? Our parents won't go even if we can find one.
I don't know where that is. That's a political, I think that's, the whole medical system in this country is falling apart as far as I'm concerned. So I don't want to know what that is. I think it depends. I'll say a few things about that. Number one, it depends on your insurance. Number two, it depends on the DSM and the DSM code, whatever they're using. So in my practice, I used I don't remember what I used, but I don't remember what it used, but if whoever that person asked wants to get in touch with me directly, I can find that out. But the next thing is, there are some, depending on what the problem is, there are some optometrists that will give you a home program. And I know that that's hard to do. And I know that many of us don't want to work with our own children. We just want to be the parent. But there are some home programs that you can find, and there are some books too. And I'm happy to give a small program to anyone, a very basic program, because I'm not a developmental optometrist. And I think it really depends on your insurance. And if you can find a way to make the diagnosis not educational, and try to get the word neuro in there somehow, you might have a better chance getting coverage.
Okay, the next question. Would you refer a child with nystagmus to a developmental optometrist or ophthalmologist?
Would I refer a child with
Nystagmus?
Oh, I would probably start with the ophthalmologist for that one. Nystagmus is the moving back and forth. I don't know if everybody knows what that is.
Yes.
I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope that people will use this information and realize what a crucial part it plays in a child's overall success and an adult's overall success. I hope everybody has great visual processing. Maybe some of you have recognized yourself in some of these things, and I hope it makes sense to you. So when you hang up, go outside if it's still light outside where you are, and focus on something far away and expand your vision and see how your life changes.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Joy, for presenting such a great topic. And we look forward to having you back in September.
I will be there.
Good night, everybody.